through today. So we just want to welcome you to our April Sites Community Call. We are grateful to have these two excellent experts in the field to share their experiences with how to close the gap between design and construction and ensuring sustainability all along the life of a sites project. It's a topic generating a lot of interest, so we're glad that you've joined. Many of you know Danielle Pieranunzi. She'll provide some updates on the program, put some context around our conversation today, and then Brian and Heather will share their valuable lessons learned, and we will leave time for Q&A at the end. Please be aware that we are recording this session. Paul, if you haven't hit record, please do so. We will be sending it out to all registrants afterwards, so you have a copy. We encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat, send questions in the Q&A section, and feel free to send those throughout the presentation. We will try to get to all of them within our time today. As with our previous community calls session, the live session is approved for one Sites CEU with GBCI. We'll put the course ID in the chat, and it will be included in the material to send after the session. So thanks again for joining us. And Danielle, I'm turning it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Anna Grace. And hello and welcome, everybody. As many of you know, Sites was developed with rigor and flexibility in mind, applying to a wide variety of projects from university campuses to government facilities, public parks, corporate headquarters, and many more. Sites fills an important gap in properly addressing the space outside of and between buildings, yet also for projects with no buildings at all. Because while every building has a site, not every site has a building. With that said, Sites and LEAD can be used in tandem. I want to start off by sharing some work that's currently underway. We're developing a specific credit submission form, which will provide additional insight, clarity, and guidance to teams pursuing certification on their projects. Through this process, we're also streamlining documentation where possible and compiling any addenda items. Several projects are pursuing Sites and LEED certifications, and while we have a document outlining synergies and equivalences between the two systems, we are further streamlining this pathway as well. We are also close to finalizing a new pilot credit to encourage projects to quantify and increase carbon sequestration on site. This credit is being developed in conjunction with a LEED technical group and references iTree and the Pathfinder app. Lastly, we are in the process of exploring adapting Sites to apply to existing built projects versus only for new construction and major renovation. Another fairly new effort is the Sites Community Partner Program, which we launched in late 2020 as a means to more actively engage design and planning firms, universities, government agency, public gardens, and other organizations with the goal to collaborate on the evolution of sites and join forces in our collective work toward a more regenerative and resilient future. Partners will also get a first look at new resources when they're available, like the ones I just mentioned. Please visit our website for more details on that. So most of you might know that the two primary documents for the Sites rating system is the abbreviated version on the left, the Sites rating system, which is available for free download, and the reference guide on the right, which is the more comprehensive manual, which provides guidance for project teams pursuing certification and is an essential resource for preparing for the Sites AP exam. So currently there are over 200 registered and certified projects, which are represented in 15 countries, including the US, China, Japan, Brazil, Mexico, Italy, Spain, and others shown here. In the US, projects are located in 38 US states and Washington, DC. This includes over 80 certified and pre-certified projects to date. And as you can see here, here's some project types breakdown to see the diversity there. And the two that I'm showing here are actually the first two Sites V2 certified projects that are that were the two speakers today were involved with. I want to briefly set the context for today's topic of site construction as it relates to the Sites rating system. While we have a section on Sites construction, section 7, preparation for construction starts much earlier in the pre-design and design stages. This includes having an integrative design process, including a plan for construction oversight, and clearly designating and communicating vegetation and soil protection zones, or what we say VSPZ, to contractors. This includes protecting these areas from equipment parking, traffic, storage of materials, for example, but as well as outlining consequences if contractors do not respect the boundaries. The soil management plan reinforces the importance of soil in the construction process by communicating to contractors areas of healthy soil to be protected, as well as a treatment plan for soil restoration. And also, in addition, contractors are to be informed of how they will identify, control, and manage invasive plants during construction. Now, here is section 7 of the rating system, and addresses proper construction practices to ensure design is carried throughout as intended and sustainable measures are implemented in this phase. It offers up to 17 points out of the 200 points. It includes 3 prerequisites and 4 credits as shown here. Sustainable practices start with ensuring that contractors are aware of sustainability goals and sites requirements. This communication step references the first prerequisite. The second prerequisite focuses on controlling construction pollutants. This is similar to a lead prerequisite. And prerequisite 7.3 highlights the importance of properly restoring soils that have been disturbed during construction. And then the credits encourage projects to go further, to restore soils disturbed from previous development, divert land clearing and demolition materials from landfills, and implement idling policies and low-emitting construction equipment. The big picture goals for this phase of the development process are ultimately to educate and transform the construction process so it protects and restores ecosystem services on a site. So it protects air and water quality, and this in turn protects the health of workers in the surrounding community. And by diverting materials from landfills, we start to view waste as a resource. Like in this far right photo, this is excavated rock, which was reused for gabions in the site certified project at NREL. Of course, with all this, the devil is in the details. So with that, I'm honored to introduce our excellent speakers who will share their valuable insights and experiences and really dig into the details of how they work with contractors and communicate sites requirements and sustainability throughout construction. Brian will kick it off. He is a senior project manager at Revision Architecture, an interdisciplinary practice that combines an architecture and design studio with sustainability consulting. Their focus is on aligning comprehensive project goals with appropriate strategies that provide real value. Brian has 2 decades of professional experience in ecologically sensitive site design, sustainable infrastructure, master planning, hydrologic analysis and design, lead and sites consulting, and high performance building design within the US and internationally, in addition to being father of these 2 adorable little girls. Now, Heather Venhouse is the principal at Regenerative Environmental Design, or RED for short, a sustainable design consulting firm that strives to connect natural and built systems in mutually beneficial ways. Now, Heather has intimate knowledge and history with sites as the former sites program manager while at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, which was one of the founding sites organizations. There, she led the development of the site's 2009 rating system, or version 1, working with numerous technical advisors and stakeholders. I can honestly say the sites probably wouldn't be here without Heather. She's also a contributing author to the Sustainable Sites Handbook and author of Designing the Sustainable Site. Brian and Heather both served as sites consultants, like I said, on their first Sites V2 certified projects, but they have also others certified and underway. And now I'm happy to pass it to Brian.
Hello, guys. Can you confirm you see the screen right now?
Yes, we're seeing.
Hello?
Great. Looks good.
Perfect. Looks perfect.
Okay, great. Danielle, thank you for that introduction. So I'm going to jump right into it and skip over my intro. We had the opportunity to work on 2 fantastic projects. Chicago's Navy Pier and United States Botanic Garden Bartholdi Park in Washington, D.C. And both of these projects applied the site's framework. So today I'd like to kind of share some of the lessons learned and strategies that we utilized for trying to embed and be successful in that effort. I really do wish I could go through more detail in the design details for the project, the backstory, all of that, but we'll just have to save that for another day. And today we'll focus on more, construction-focused topics as it relates to these two projects. We started working on Chicago Navy Pier in 2013. At the time, SITES was in its pilot phase, basically, Navy Pier really does have a very rich history, a layered history of different uses. But in the modern era, it's been known as Festival Pier. So Festival Pier is, if you haven't been, is on the waterfront in Chicago, a very large pier. And it's actually one of the most popular tourist destinations in the Midwest. And this was the case even though they kind of felt fatigued, was dated, overly commercial. So the client, Navy Pier Incorporated, really wanted to make it more contemporary, green, and sustainable. And they felt like the SITES framework was a good tool to help them get there. There was a lot of complexity in the project. It consisted of both on land and on pier conditions that had to be accounted for in the design and construction. Here you're looking at an aerial of what we call Post Brothers Park and Head House Plaza. This is the on land portion of the project. After completion, you've got that fantastic fountain that turns into an ice skating rink in the center. And then there's designing for and constructing for the on land condition was very different from that of the on pier condition. Soils, stormwater management, constructability, et cetera, they all had to be thought of differently. The pier portion of the project presented a challenge, primarily being that there was really no vegetation and a very thick concrete slab. So with those nice large saws, they were able to cut through that slab and incorporate what we call tree tubs by putting in the steel girders, soil, trees. Here's the view looking back toward the city from on the pier. Ultimately, 124 trees were put onto the pier, and that really changed the dynamic and the feel of the pier. It's much more comfortable, much more pleasant environment to be on, and just softer. Here's an image of sort of maybe from a couple of years ago, looking out. You can kind of get a sense of the entire purview of the park scope with that Head House Plaza on land, the pier, and some work to the south and east as well. But I think it could be said that today Navy Pier could be considered a contemporary green and sustainable park space. United States Botanic Garden was another, at Bartoli Park was another project that we used with it, applied the SITES framework to. It's located on Washington, D.C. Mall, very close to the United States Capitol building. And maybe you might be familiar if you've walked the mall with the United States Botanic Gardens Conservatory. Bartoli Park is located just south of that conservatory. So here you're looking at an aerial of that triangular park. It's 1.2 acres and bound by some roadways. And the work that was started has been completed. And really, United States Botanic Garden really is a showcase of sustainable gardening now. The park was originally created in 1932 and had not been renovated or restored at all in that entire 80-year plus period. And so it was kind of due to bring it up to modern day standards. Interestingly, United States Botanic Garden was one of the three developers of the SITES framework before it was acquired by GBCI. SITES framework was originally developed by Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center at UTexas and American Society of Landscape Architects. So you can imagine they were committed and that had a vested interest in applying SITES framework in a successful way. So the project included renovation of that central Bartoli fountain that you're seeing, improving accessibility, new hardscaping, seating, an edible garden, permeable paving, and a lot of effort into protecting the existing sensitive plants and soils. Additionally, the park is ringed by a series of rainwater gardens. I would say that the park really does excel in its programming. as the park connects people to nature through programming that includes yoga, nature and motion walks, and educational and therapeutic programs for veterans and active duty soldiers, just to mention a few. And we're really proud to say that both projects were gold level certified Sites V2 projects. And from applying the Sites framework to the projects, we did identify a lot of value add opportunities and a lot of value add that came from that. From team learning, I would say that's kind of, it provided learning and growing opportunities for people who are engaged to have a more holistic understanding of what it means to be a sustainable site. It offered specific and quantifiable direction or metrics or targets and thresholds for the designers and developers to work toward. It was quantifiable and measurable or third-party verified. And that another way to say that is, it really does offer, by formally pursuing any framework or sites, it does offer that accountability that offers so much value to the client and ultimately to the project. Without being held accountable to define performance goals, a project may, what happened there? Here we go. A project may, underperform or not meet its specified economic, ecological, equity goals. Driving the materials industry, this is a really biggie, I think, for sites in general. The building industry has been used to trying to dig up or provide transparency information, product information like EPDs, environmental product declarations, recycled content, all of that kind of information about their materials that they're selling because LEED was a driver to the materials industry, within the last 20 years, for the last 20 years. Now, this is new to sites, and so you're seeing some growing pains in terms of manufacturers providing that information, but there's a lot of value just more broadly about how it's driving the industry. It does offer, the rating system does offer an emphasis on public health and education, which is not necessarily on the forefront of a contractor's mind, and pre-design through maintenance, full project life cycle. So one thing that I do like about the sites rating system is that it takes you through pre-design, sort of follows the path of a project, pre-design through design, through construction, through operations and maintenance. So it's very holistic in that way. And then when you're looking at the challenges, essentially it's just the opposite of the value add or the negative inverse of the value add items. And so team learning, there was a steep learning curve for the teams that we were engaged with. But ultimately for all of these challenges, another way to view it is they were growing pains. There were really opportunities to learn and do create better projects. And so ultimately, the value add is there, and it's going to result in a better built environment. So there are a bunch of processes and tools we use to try to drive success. Pre-design, assessment, and planning is kind of an all hands on deck effort when you're doing your preliminary studies to find out more about the site and site conditions and sort of neighborhood conditions. This can result in reducing surprises later on. Team goal setting sessions and contractor kickoffs. We sort of dive into prerequisites and credits. We set goals. We identify champions. Start thinking about key dates, regular calls. All that is quite important to set that sort of infrastructure for a project about how sites will work. In specifications, it's really important to tune your project specs to match your project goals. And for the contractor, it's all in the spec. They bid off the spec and they refer to the spec to ensure they're delivering on their contract obligations. So we developed a set of specs that clearly describes sites, materials, credits, and associated requirements, and also ask the contractor to vet material suppliers and identify suppliers that can meet this criteria. Sites action plan is something that I will get into a bit later on some of these slides. And then ongoing product submittals and ongoing reports and calls, obviously that's important in order to verify that you're on track and meeting your site's goals and maintain accountability within the construction process. This is just sort of a theory slide to transition into some new topic. And I think that there's a lot of value add, but with sites, but it really does depend on when the team starts to apply the sites framework. So Early adoption is absolutely critical. Early adoption results in greater adoption of sustainability strategies, all sort of at a lower cost threshold. Whereas, later adoption is going to result in greater challenges trying to embed that sustainability design solution or idea, and greater costs to incorporate a sustainable design idea. So earlier the better. And we certainly try to emphasize that with the client on both Chicago Navy Pier and Bartoli Park. Here you're looking at an image of the design team, contractors, ownership, all of us kind of getting together to kick off the project, hold a sustainability brainstorming session, and think about and go through the criteria of sites. In part this activity was to get to know each other, in parts get to know sites, and in parts kind of to begin to gain ownership from the team, really, and particularly ownership from the client, because that's going to go a long way in terms of making sure it's, you get traction with sites and set up the project for success under the sites framework. So this is kind of the first example or prerequisite credit that I'm going to touch on specifically. P2.2, conduct a pre-design assessment. This is where you're looking at site, you're developing all the baseline information for the project and getting a sense of those conditions. Soils, hydrology, vegetation. What kind of materials do you have that are going to be salvageable, cultural resources, transportation connections, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And having all that information is great for informing the design, identifying opportunities, identifying constraints, but also for that information feeding into the design and ultimately resulting in fewer hiccups or issues that are kind of discovered during the construction process. And a good example of that on Navy Pier was the sustainable plant production. As part, we reviewed local nurseries for their capability to supply this huge quantity of plant material, native plants, in the volume we needed, all while prioritizing nurseries or providers that perform environmental reporting and transparency. So we felt like doing this early resulted in better pricing, ensured supply and supply of the desired plants, and it limited the potential for supply or value engineering conflicts later in construction. So essentially we embedded sustainable plant selection in the project by performing this research, I feel like. Sites action plan. This is kind of, I would call this a revision special here. I mean, it's something that it's one of the first things we ask of the contractor to do, even before they put a shovel in the ground. We ask them to put together a sites action plan. And these are the components of a site action plan. And ultimately what we were hoping for is putting together a one-stop document where you can, where the contractor can reference it and understand how they're going to be tracking, documenting, and gaining approval processes for materials that are used on the project. The sites action plan is really intended to enhance and simplify what can be pretty cumbersome, the communication paths and documentation processes necessary to attain site success. And then on the flip side is you have your plans and there's the site's progress report. So we ask that the contractors, on either a quarterly or a monthly basis, provide regular progress reports to support each of those plans and policies that we just referenced on the sites action plan. So for example, soils management plan, we're asking for a monthly update on photos and tree protection and laydown areas. For material selection tracking process, we're actually asking for them to provide the backup for cut sheets and submittals, that reference, for example, products, chemistry or recycled content, so on and so forth. But this is really important, I think, as a tool to have these site progress reports as a request for accountability, to verify that we're on track, to verify that the contractors are keeping track of this information. It results in fewer surprises and it continually engages the construction management team. Here's another tool. We call this the Sites Product and Material Data Worksheet. It's a form that can be provided to the contractor, and the contractor can then provide it to the subs. And it can be filled out electronically or by hand. And basically, it's a one-stop kind of document where you can, when you're reviewing any kind of submittal, you can carry that key sustainability information and pop it into here. And then it's just easier for either myself to review, the architects to review, or to carry that information into the necessary calculators for sites. So kind of jumping from there into an example of how sites push the materials industry and how that, you know, the specs and those material tracking forms helped us. I would say was Unilock is a really good example of an interesting material story. So by far, this is the most common material type on the project by weight, by cost, by square footage, these pavers that you're looking at. And so our site specifications kind of put a high level of recycled content criteria in there. So that was it was a challenge for a lot of paver manufacturers to get there. But Unilock was really kind of amenable and worked with us. We have 550,000 ultimately of these pretty chunky pavers, ubiquitous throughout the project. They're custom designed for the project. They exhibit high SRI, and they incorporate more recycled content than Unilock had ever done before. 30% of the paver is recycled content. It was copper slag, and actually resulted in a stronger product. The soils management plan. The plan specifies how construction activities are designed to minimize soil disturbance, how disturbed soils will be remediated, and how soils will be tested to confirm performance criteria and that it's met. And there's really kind of 6 documents that are compiled together, at least in my history of working on these, to have that all in one spot. Your ENS plan, your staging and laydown plan, soil restoration plan, your soil specs, soil protection details, and your soil preparation and demolition plan. We'll go through those in a little bit more detail. But before you can develop your soil management plan, you really need to know what's happening with your site in terms of the soils and their condition. So, you know, this is an example from United States Botanic Garden, Bartoli Park. Shout out to Jason Curtis and Ray Mims. You know, here you have just some initial mapping of where are those healthy soils, where are the impacted soils in comparison to our lead project boundary, or sorry, our site's project boundary. And then basically all of those components of your soil management plan are speaking to those different types of conditions. You guys are all familiar with an ENS plan. Skip over that. Staging a laydown plan is really important. It identifies approved construction staging locations. So, you know, where are you going to be placing your materials? How are you getting into the site? And how are you doing this in a way that it's not too tight for contractors to do what they need to do, while all at the same time not stamping on, you know, sensitive vegetation or soils? You know, that's something really important to think about and think through in a you know, robust way. Soil specifications, these outline requirements for soil testing and pre-construction and post-construction. It describes the detail, in detail, the planned treatment for each soil amendment zone, identifies location of soil protection, and outlines requirements for delivery and storage and handling of soils. So this is really important, obviously. And, you know, on a project, you may have more than one soil spec. So for United States Botanic Garden, where they're in DC, they fall on a combined sewer outfall, or CSO. You know, it's really important for them to reduce their runoff. They had 10 rain gardens that basically wrap around the project site and reduce water to the CSO system. But, you know, because you have this kind of landscape condition, you're going to have a specific soil spec for bioinfiltration soils versus having one for planting soils. And then here you see tree and soil protection fencing and signage. There were some really nice soils that need to be protected on United States Botanic Garden, as well as Navy Pier, but this is an image of Bart Park. And there were some unique and valuable plants that needed to be protected as well. I think this image on the right is showing a pomegranate tree and I might botch this. It was either, I think it might have been like the northernmost pomegranate tree in the world or the US. I want to say the world, but don't quote me on that. But it was important to get this right. And, part of that is the signage as well. Protecting and enhancing soil health was paramount to the United States Botanic Garden. It was also paramount to sites. Topsoil is removed and saved off-site, amended with organic compost, and returned to the park for planting. A lot of the plants on the project were maintained, but some of them were actually taken for use on Capitol Hill and DC public schools. And you might find some surprises along the way, even with all that good pre-design assessment. I think on Bart Park, before it was ever a park, there were buildings on the site, and I think they were residences, brick residences. They had a lot of information about their soil at Bart Park, but it didn't, and they knew they had great topsoil down to a certain depth, but below that, they actually discovered a bunch of fill. So there will be surprises along the way. In this case, a lot of this material was left in site, used on site as fill or recycled. But some of it was taken off site to United States Botanic Gardens growing facility about 4 miles from the project. So I'll wrap it up here. 3 lessons and takeaways and messages. 1, start utilizing this framework as early as possible in order to get the most value out of it that you can. Hold regular team calls and run iterative performance evaluations to ensure accountability and to keep the project on track. And 3, although there could be many more lessons, 3, introduce the contractor to sites and support them developing a site's action plan and reporting plan. I like the site's action plan. I like trying to encourage contractors to have that up and running and have it develop before they start their work, so they have a good point of reference. There were great teams involved in Navy Pier and Bart Park. I just kind of listed the team members here. I wish I could, I played a small role in both of these projects, but this will be part of the presentation that's given out to people, so you can reference there. But thank you for your time. I'm going to hand it off to Heather. Heather, are you there? There you go.
Hello?
We can hear you. Slides look great too.
Oh, good, good. I thought, oh no, now I did it. Okay, hello everybody. I wish I could see all of you. It would make this a lot more fun, but we'll do what we can. So just very quickly, this is a project in Midtown Park in Houston. We're currently wrapping up the site's documentation there. It's a super cool project, largely because it's located over a parking garage. So it's basically an intensive green roof, one big intensive green roof. It's been interesting because during the construction process, Midtown endured Hurricane Harvey, and so the site got to be reworked for that. They hosted ESPN for the Super Bowl and have had multiple phases of construction. And so looking back on this project, I would say that the lessons learned is the value of good record keeping. When a project has lots of starts and stops, some which you can predict, others like natural disasters, you cannot, keeping good records of where you left off and where you need to pick back up will save you lots of time and money and frustration. Thankfully, our team has done well with this, and we're in the last phase of sites documentation, and it'll be excited to finally celebrate this project with the entire team. When I started working with GBCI on this presentation, they requested 3 lessons learned. And as Brian said, I think there are many, but today we'll discuss these 3. Every project has an opportunity to learn something new and improve. But there are some overarching concepts that can definitely make a sites project more successful. For my business, that includes working with the project teams from the onset of a project and determining the performance goals early. I try to think about weaving sustainability solutions into the design, the construction drawings, and the specifications. If you can think about this as an analogy of a piece of thread being woven into a rug, it's difficult to pull that thread out without unraveling the whole thing. And that's what we're trying to do with sustainability in these projects. So looking at this first lesson, it's super important for the owner to communicate their commitment to sites goals. That this is an expectation that the entire project team is working towards. And this is what I'm talking about is early in the design process. And what you're hoping to achieve is early adoption from the project team so that they take ownership of those performance benchmarks in design, and then they carry that ownership throughout construction. This will become particularly important because change orders are going to come up. There are going to be unforeseen issues that will arise during construction. And you need the project team to continue to lead the charge and to help address these issues in ways that meet the performance goals and ultimately lead to site certification. As you all know, integrated design is a prerequisite of sites, and that prerequisite does include a contractor professional as part of the integrated design team. We're not always lucky enough to start working with the contractor right away, but often there can be other contracting expertise added to a project. And so we try to take this opportunity to ask the contractor about construction means and methods super early. Asking them, how would you build this? This design shows that the pathway or the building stays out of the critical root zone for trees, but can it really be built that way? What will it take to build it? Working with the contractor on how you can establish tight limits of construction, and then developing the VSPZ plan early so that it's included in the pricing exercises and begins to solidify the site's requirements. I'll talk more about the VSPZ later, but it's a critical component of this. And so in my projects, we're constantly tracking progress towards our goals throughout critical milestones in the project to help ensure that those performance goals are being met. We also identify a champion from the project team for each one of those prerequisites and credits. This project member keeps this criteria in mind when working through design and construction. And what you see is they ultimately take ownership of that piece because it's reflected in their work. This particular project is a relatively small project with super big goals in Stephenville, Texas, the Middle Trinity Groundwater Conservation District Learning Center. I'm working with Waldrop Construction, Studio Outside in Lake Flato. And currently, we're very early in design development, and we're already looking at material selection, and the contribution to our site's goals are being discussed. We're doing this because we want those materials to be included in the pricing reviews, but also we need this information so that we can understand the cost impacts of sites on this project, reduce the cost impacts of sites wherever possible, and then make the best choices during the value engineering process. I do think that a huge area of growth for our industry is sustainable landscape management. Sites, as you all know, sites has two prerequisites that require input from maintenance professionals. The site's consultant can use this opportunity to get very valuable feedback that is often overlooked. In this picture, you're seeing us at the Dell Medical School at the University of Texas at Austin, actually walking with landscape services. UT at Austin has what is, in my opinion, a very sophisticated landscape services group in that they have water conservation practices that are superb, as well as they've already adopted campus-wide organic land management practices. And so it was fun working with them. And part of the value that a sites consultant can bring to a project is making sure that these folks' voices are heard, and asking the maintenance professional early, what does it take to maintain this design? Can you maintain this design in the way that it's been designed, or what issues do you see arising? And then working to help find those solutions. Because ultimately, we're not building sustainable projects if the plant materials or even the building materials have to be replaced in short timelines. Okay, moving on to the second lesson. Contractors also need to understand that site certification at whatever level has been, envisioned for the project is a project requirement. It's helpful for the contractor to understand that the owner has already invested energy and resources working with the design team towards achieving the site's goal, and that the information they need to achieve sites is in the design drawings and the specifications. Communicating this not only at pre-construction meetings, which of course is a requirement of sites, but also at pre-bid meetings, if you can, will help with the bidding process. And also, as we know, not every contractor has experience with sites. Many have experience with LEED, but not with sites, helping them understand the difference with the two, or if they have no experience with it, helping them be comfortable, that you're going to assist them through this process, and the information they need is in the documents. So the scorecard, site scorecard is often included in specifications. I don't really think it's necessary for a contractor to fully understand everything in this scorecard. However, they do need to understand that there are prerequisites and there are credits, that we must meet the prerequisites, and that a certain number of credits are needed, to add up and to get the score that we need, and that they have an important role in achieving those points, and exactly how are those points related to their work. That's the piece that's really important about this scorecard. Design teams will look to the site's consultant to provide the sustainable design requirement specification. If the project is a LEED project, this will need to be coordinated with the LEED consultant as well. Contractors will appreciate the submittal requirements being clearly spelled out up front. This tells them, the work that they're going to have to do. This can help save the project money, as it helps prevent contractors from overestimating their work or being fearful of a site's project. If you look at the beginning of the site's reference guide, there's also some important information in the site's process section in particular regarding site certification and dealing primarily with the building skin outward. This is important for projects that may also have buildings that are occupied. Sites does distinguish between buildings that are occupied and air conditioned versus those that are not, and separating those materials and that work for the contractor so that they understand that up front. In this section of the manual, there's also information on staging areas that should be part of the discussion with the contractor. And so including this again in your specifications, communicating that early will help them when they're bidding their work, but will also help them understand what materials to track and how carefully they need to be tracking and where. As was stated earlier, we could have a whole hour discussion on vegetation and soil protection zones. It is a super, super important prerequisite to sites because it is connected to so many credits. It's basically the essence of sites. It's ultimately, protecting the ecosystem service benefits of soils and vegetation. It really gets to the heart of what sites is. The VSPZ need to be communicated in drawings and specifications. It's important to discuss these requirements in advance with the contractor and get them in design drawings early enough that they are a part of the pricing exercises. This is because sites goes way beyond standard tree protection. And, I have many contractors in the contractor selection process really sell themselves on how much they like trees, how well they've worked around trees, how they care for trees in the construction process. And I believe them, I think that is true, but sites is a much higher standard than that. And so when you begin to communicate these VSPZ requirements early, it starts the discussion of what the site's requirements really are. don't be surprised if you get some pushback. Don't be surprised if the contractor doesn't like it. Nobody, typically contractors do not like limiting construction access. However, there are opportunities to work together, to find solutions, to switch equipment, and hopefully if you're early enough in the design process, maybe to adjust, still achieve the design goals, but adjust them so that you can keep those ecosystem service benefits and achieve the design. Working together early on these VSPZs will help you establish expectations so that there are less surprises once construction begins and help make the construction process more smooth. I do believe that fences are friends. The general contractor in charge of the site cannot be everywhere all the time, watching all of the many contractors. And so fences clearly communicate areas that are off limits. Fences also prevent these areas from growing over time and becoming disturbed and part of the construction process. Signage in the field to remind contractors is also super helpful and can save a lot of heartache and money over a project. Not all contractors read all of the construction documents and the specifications, nor when they're out in the field working on this project or other projects, do they remember all the specifications and requirements for this project. And a site's project can be very different from their typical work. And so these types of reminders in the field can be super helpful. I'm not going to talk a lot about the soil management plan, although I do think it is extremely critical, right up there with VSPZ, because Brian went into this in good detail earlier, and also again, this could be another hour discussion. But the soil management plan is a prerequisite, that's ultimately carried out in construction. The requirements of this need to be communicated carefully in both drawings and specifications and field reminders. This is Kingsbury Commons at Peace Park here in Austin. It's currently under construction, should be wrapping up in a few months. And, we harvested soils in the demolition process and then stored them on site during construction. In the soil management plan, we separated the areas where these soils would be stored so that we would not confuse the contractors, but also so that it is a visual reminder that there are different soil piles, that they go back in different places, and that they've been harvested for different reasons. So these are soils that were harvested from the Bermuda grass lawn. These soils will go back in the Bermuda grass area. These are soils that were harvested from the woodland area. And this is a higher quality soil with higher levels of organic matter, what you would expect to find in a woodland. And these soils are going to be reused in planting beds. Separating these two soils is important because this soil has Bermuda grass tillers in it. And we do not want those Bermuda grass tillers to give us issues in our planting beds. It's also has lower organic matter and is a different texture soil than these woodland soils. And so by putting them in two separate parts of the site, we're visually communicating to the contractor that those soils go in different places, and when they go and collect them, as it's shown in the soil management plan, where they go back to. Sites specifications or other specifications, should include equipment requirements. This goes to Credit 77. I also recommend including requirements for low impact equipment or tracked equipment that has a PSI lower than 5. Here you see the contractor, this is part of their submittals, actually telling us what equipment they're going to use, the size of that equipment and the pressure of that equipment. And it is pretty amazing how big of a difference this equipment can make. Many people, soil scientists, have measured soil compaction with different types of tracked equipment and weights of equipment, and spreading out that load is a huge help. In a little bit, I'll show you some pictures of some comparisons that we did for soil restoration at Peace Park, looking at different material types. The construction waste management plan, a separate part of the specifications. LEED has really led the way with this credit, so it's actually not that difficult, I don't think. For a sites project, the important thing to communicate is that materials include soils, rocks, vegetation, other things beyond what a LEED project might include. And then also the criteria for how those soils and other waste materials have to be reused in other places. We talk a lot about how can we continue to bring sites requirements in the forefront of the construction process so that they don't get forgotten about, which is easy to do when a project is moving quickly and there's so many moving parts and so many decisions being made. And so it is important to keep putting these requirements in front of contractors. And as we all know, not everyone reads all the specifications, nor do they remember them or separate them always between projects. And so adding notes to the drawings, like this is a soil management and restoration notes for this specific part of this project to the drawings. This is a drawing that hopefully will be taken out in the field. It's just a reminder that this piece is done different, because a soil management plan often has many different soil types or many different soil management strategies. And so at last, we're going to talk about, I think, one of the most important pieces, and also at times one of the most challenging, and that's the ongoing contractor education and relationship building. And so I have to say that working with contractors is often one of my favorite parts of a project. Both sides, project teams and contractors, can learn so much from each other. In this picture, I'm at Peace Park working with Harvey Cleary, contractors and the design team, and we're on site prior to demolition, prior to pre-COVID, when we got to walk around without masks on. And what we're discussing is these sites requirements, the VSPZ, the soil harvesting, the construction access and material storage, and walking the site and looking at the plans and making sure that we're all on the same page. And for this part of the presentation, I did follow up with this team to discuss lessons learned, because we definitely have some. And so that's what I'll be sharing with you now. Just to give you a sense, Kingsbury Common at Peace Parks is 10.3 acres. And over this 14-month process, there's been 25 subcontractor trades and 500 individual subcontractors. So that is a lot of people to continue talking about sites and continue educating sites. And when you look at this picture, you see all of that work going on at one time. And even though the general contractor has many superintendents in the field, they can't be everywhere at the same time. And so there has to be other reminders. There has to be other ways, to continue working with subcontractors and others to remember what's important. And so what we came up with is, John Patty said, the noisy wheel gets the grease. And so, of course, there's a sites pre-construction meeting, that's a requirement of sites. But at that pre-construction meeting, you typically get the project managers. You may not get the folks that are going to be in the field. And so in addition to that, some sort of new contractor orientation, where every time a contractor comes onto this project, there is information that's given to them about sites, about this project, about what's special and what they need to do that is different than other project that is related to their trade, including sites requirements and reminders and weekly safety meetings, developing construction access plans for all of the trades. And this may have to be a living document, but talking to them, how do you get from point A to point B? Where can you park? Where can you store your materials? Where can you go? Where can you not go? And why this is important. And then, of course, using that signage to really denote all of these areas so that they understand it, so that it's clear, so that it's in the field and it cannot be forgotten. And so you take, a soil management plan like this, and then you ask your contractor. And this particular plan was developed by CleanScapes. And what we're talking about is, where are you going to restore soils? Where are you going to plant soils? How do you work with other trades so that once those things are done, they're not compacted again or damaged in a way that would require that work to be done again? Now, this is one example of how this was done for the subconsultant that was handling the soils and the plants, but this type of access plan also needs to be done for the electrician and the plumber and all of the other trades that are moving through. And you notice it doesn't have to be a fancy plan. It's not difficult. It's something that can be developed working together very quickly, but it's an important expectation that can save a headache down the line. At Pease Park, in areas under tree canopy where we were preparing planting beds, we used air spade. This is a slow process for contractors. It's not the cheapest way to do it, but under trees it's necessary. Going back out with the contractor and looking at their work and showing how it is protecting roots, how it is creating a good planting bed, brings value to that process and helps them understand the importance of that. When this is one of the structures at Pease Park, that's tucked into the tree canopy, it's going to be fabulous. I would bet my bottom dollar that this structure will be one of those iconic Austin structures that everyone's going to want to take their picture by. But when we were developing this construction plan for this piece, the protection of those trees around it, because it was built to be nestled into the trees, required conversations about the special equipment that would be used in and out, and the special construction pathways. And so this is a mulched pathway that was put in. You can see it has VSPZ on either side. You can see the fencing there. And this mulched pathway was put in to basically provide that lift right there, an opportunity to get in and out and to move around without damaging trees. And so I went out with my soil penetrometer, and then working with the contractors, we were talking about soil restoration in different areas and what we needed to do prior to planting. And so this is a mulch trail that was kept throughout construction. We came in and we removed the mulch, down to about 4 or 5 inches, and then measured the compaction. And the compaction was compared against soils, inside the VSPZ fencing that had not been disturbed. And what we found is that the soils underneath the mulch were comparable to the VSPZ soils. We also even found, earthworms underneath this mulch where equipment had just been driving back and forth. And so what that means is that the restoration of these soils and ultimately the cost on the contractor is going to be much cheaper. Here we are again in an area that has had, disturbance because of different infrastructure coming in, measuring the compaction, and then again informing those soil restoration plans with the contractor before planting begins. And this is actually the contractor taking the measurements. They saw me doing it, they become interested, they, hand me that, let me try it. And they want to see. And we spent quite a bit of time going around the site and looking at these different things. And it really is fascinating, the different construction methods, equipments, pathways that can make the soil restoration work, and ultimately the resiliency of the site so much better. And so with that, I will wrap up and turn it over to others for questions. Danielle?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so we have running low on time, but we do have a lot of questions, and if we don't address them, we can answer them via email after. So I'll just start with some of these. Heather and Brian, if you can unmute your microphone. The first question is, can you offer advice on the creation of specification as a tool early in the project process prior to the bid set that help ensure successful implementation of site's goals? If you want to expand on that a little bit more, either one of you.
I would just say include as much as you can, as early as you can, so that it is including in those pricing sets, and also so that it begins to clarify very early what the requirements will be with the general contractor.
Great. Brian, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's good. Early's good. I think that it's important to go beyond, and I know Heather does this, go beyond just the sustainable site specification, and make sure that a lot of the requirements, a lot of the criteria that's relevant to any particular section is reiterated so that doesn't get lost in the shuffle.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. And I think this one is for you, Brian. And I don't know if if you want to pull it up, but it's this is the question for you is, are the 6 documents for the soil management plan part of the contract documents or just for the site submittal? I know the specs will be part of the CDs, but the diagrams, question marks.
Yeah. I think that in the case of, I don't know if all 6 were, I don't have my presentation up anymore, but I think, certainly, your ESC, your erosion sediment control plan is part of it. Your soil specifications are part of that. Typically, your site laydown and staging area plan would be part of that as well. Although it'd be great to kind of take another look at all of this stuff with the contractor that's ultimately selected. So, it makes sense for them too. But I think that most, if not all of those 6 were part of the base contract documents. I think that the only thing that wouldn't be was anything that's basically customer curtailed based off of the findings from the soil survey of the site, right? So a lot of that happens. A lot of that happens in between design and after, and before construction. So, for example, if you're mapping soils and then creating an amendment plan, I take that back. You need to know what your amendment is within the soil spec. So, yes. My answer to that question is yes.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Here's another one. Can you talk a bit about penalties and enforcement of penalties for the VSPZ encroachment?
Whoa.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think that nothing communicates things like money, and even getting it down to the square foot or the value of a tree is important. One of the things that my specifications include is that any soils that are disturbed within VSPZ zones becomes restoring those soils, back to site specification is a cost that goes back to the general contractor. And that helps them to uphold those VSPZs a little better. And then also helping just everyone understand the restoration criteria within sites and that it is a prerequisite, and that the more soils that are disturbed unnecessarily, the more soils that are going to have to be restored. And so, of course, there's cost implications with that as well.
Great point. And I just want to clarify too, for those that are unfamiliar with VSPZ, that there are some project sites when you're starting that they might not have a VSPZ, that it might be completely degraded and more of a brownfield or grayfield site. So that's, just want to clarify that too. Okay, so we have another one. This is specific to you, Heather. Do you find a specific depth of mulch was most successful in preventing compaction?
That trail that I showed you there was 10 inches. And then they added to it, of course, throughout the construction process over the 14 months. And when we went and looked at it 2 weeks ago, the mulch had probably been pushed into the soil to where it was about 4 inches. And I was actually shocked when the compaction was the same as the VSPZ. I knew it would be close, but I couldn't believe that it was right on. And I was like jumping up and down for joy when we found earthworms underneath there. So I would start with, the 10 inches, but then it's a reminder that depth has to be maintained throughout construction. And so additional mulch will be needed.
Great. And Brian, do you want to add to that at all, or?
Oh, no, I thought that was a really interesting piece of information. Thank you for sharing that, Heather.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So we'll take one more because I know we're over time, but and we will answer questions after the webinar as well. So this is, I think, geared toward you, Brian. Sites action plan and progress reports. Are there any potential problems in requiring these to coincide with pay application reviews? Is the GC able to collect and compile information quickly enough to meet that monthly interval, Or is there too much of a delay in obtaining this information from vendors, suppliers, subcontractors, and quarterly is more appropriate or manageable?
Yeah. I would say, we were able to effectively do it on both projects. That said, there does need to be an aspect of flexibility, right? So you're just looking for basically a progress report or update to the best to their extent possible based on the information they've received relatively recently. And then they'll share that with you. But, there's to expect them to have every single submittal, for example, within that progress report may not be fair, given the turnaround time that's required. So, I think it all kind of comes out in the wash ultimately, just as long as you're getting a fairly robust progress report, more or less every month or quarterly, then that should do the job.
Thank you, thank you. All right, well, I thank you both so much for your time in preparing for this and for sharing all of your experiences, or not all of them, but it's a snapshot of them. I know this could be a whole day workshop. So thank you again for doing this and all your good work and being involved with sites. Again, we'll answer questions that we haven't addressed via email after the webinar is over. And I want to end with just giving you some dates for our future sites community calls. If you want to save those dates, we also post this on our events page. We'll have more details there. And if you have any ideas for topic ideas or projects that you want to learn more about, please do let us know. Email us at sites@gbci.org. Thank you again to our speakers, our wonderful speakers, and for everyone for attending today. Have a great rest of your week.